This is the 2015 Maserati GranTurismo, and you can now pick one up for 75% of its original value. Let's take a look at it. So this all began when Maserati wanted to create the ultimate grand touring car. And from 2004 to 2007, they were producing the Grand Sport. That eventually evolved into the GranTurismo. The first model was released in 2008, and since then, they have made this 10 times better, far more reliable, and it has always sounded just as good, but there's a reason I went with the 2015. You're gonna see why. So under the hood of the 2015 Maserati GranTurismo is a 4.7-liter Ferrari-derived V8. One of the best sounding V8s in the entire automotive industry, and I don't care what anyone else says. Now, this engine produces 454 horsepower and 384 pound-feet of torque. 10 more horsepower and 8 pound-feet of torque more than just the base model. Not gonna make a huge difference, but it's not that much more expensive either. Now, the 0 to 60 on this thing is 4.7 seconds. That may seem pretty slow when you have crazy cars like the C7 Z06 doing the 0 to 60 in the low 3s, but this car is not about the speed. It's about the enjoyment. It's about the drive. It's about going for a long cruise and having the best cruise of your life. That's because this thing weighs 4,300 pounds. Don't get me wrong, you can still toss this thing around corners, but you're much better off in something like a BMW M car or a Porsche Cayman. This isn't really meant to be taken to the track. Now, paired with the 4.7-liter V8 inside of the Maserati GranTurismo is either going to be a ZF automatic transmission, which is the one I have, and it's the most reliable, lowest maintenance transmission you can get. You could also go with an F1 transmission, which is going to be the most costly transmission you can get. You're going to need clutch replacements every roughly 15,000 miles, and that's about $5,000 each time you do it. Or you can go with the MC shift if you go with the Maserati GranTurismo MC. So just depends on your own taste. The ZF's going to be the least amount of fun, but it's going to be also the least costly. And I gotta tell you, out of all the cars I have ever reviewed, this one takes the cake for the most enjoyable driving experience. I have never heard such a beautiful noise. I have never had such a comfortable drive, and I have never gotten so much looks and so much attention. The GranTurismo has the perfect amount of noise, the perfect amount of gurgles and pops when you just tap on that accelerator. All right, now let's hop out of this thing and check out the exterior. All right, now let's go and take a look at the outside of the 2015 Maserati GranTurismo, and I am going to confidently say this is the most beautiful car you can buy under $50,000. We've looked at Scat Packs, we've looked at Corvettes, we've looked at Mustangs, we've looked at BMWs, Audis, all that stuff, and none of them even come close to how beautifully designed the GranTurismo is. Let's go ahead and start with this absolutely massive and beautiful grille with these nice lines going down through it and that huge Maserati logo that stands out. Right above that Maserati logo is another Maserati logo. Maserati tends to add like way too many logos on their cars, but I will say the GranTurismo is pretty deserving of it. Now, after the year 2012, the Maserati GranTurismo got the facelift, and so these vents right here on the side are not on GranTurismos between the year 2008 and 2012. I think if you want one of the most beautiful Maserati GranTurismos, don't get the 2024, don't get the 2018 or 2019, get the years 2013 through 2017, because this design is just perfect. Now, also in the front end here, you're gonna have 2 parking sensors on each side. This car does not have a backup camera, by the way, so parking sensors in the front and the back are very, very useful to have. You're also gonna have this nice little black splitter, and you'll notice this thing is actually pretty dang low to the ground. You'll scrape if you don't look for where you're going. And the front end of this car is just simply not complete without this massively slanted hood. It's also beautifully designed with these nice lines that go right through it. And I just think the way this thing is slanted, structured, designed makes this car so beautiful for the front end. And by the way, if you need to replace the headlights, they're over $3,000. Now what's crazy to me is how similar the side angle of this car looks to the Ferrari California. In fact, the same people that designed this car also designed the Ferrari California, so that makes sense. But that speaks volumes to how good this thing looks. Now on the front side profile of this car, this one has blacked out wheels, and I don't think you can go wrong with the black and red look. Either way, no matter what you get, the GranTurismo is going to look absolutely beautiful. You also have these massive brake calipers, which this thing needs because it does weigh 4,300 pounds. However, these are drilled rotors, so they do the job on cooling and making sure that you still have a lot of braking power, and the brake pads will last a pretty long time. Also on the calipers, you have Maserati written on them. Mine are a little bit faded, so just ignore that, but when I get them repainted, they're going to be beautiful, and I will soon, shortly, I think. Now, right behind the front wheel, you're going to have the infamous tri-vents. They are functional, which is cool, but they probably don't do a whole lot. It's just a really cool design element, kind of outlined in this chrome, which looks really, really good. You're also going to have the designers of the car, the signature right below this, and a turn signal indicator, which kind of honestly ruins the look of it, but that's a mandate. Now, this is a 4-seater car, but it only has 2 doors, and the doors in the front are pretty dang large. It just adds to the feeling of how big this car is. If you're parked in a tight space, this thing's gonna hit the next car a little bit too quickly, so you're gonna wanna be careful of that. But the back seats are some of the most spacious back seats I have ever been in, and everybody I take for a ride in this thing says the same thing. We'll talk about the interior in a second. I will say one pretty negative thing is the fact that the door handle latches are electronic. They do have a manual switch on them just in case the electronic one breaks, but that's just another thing about this car that you better watch out for if you're gonna buy it. Now the tire widths back here are 285, which is pretty meaty, and because this thing only makes 454 horsepower, but it weighs 4,300 pounds, tire widths of this size do the job for making sure this thing grips. I have floored it from a stop and never heard any squeal or lost any traction. And the brakes back here are going to be quite a bit smaller than the front, but the front ones definitely do the job. Now, even the gas cap cover is relying on electronics. There is a button on the dash that you press in order to get this gas cap cover to open. Again, another thing I hate having to rely on when it comes to electronics in this car. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the back end of this car is really starting to grow on me. I think no angle is better than the front, but this back end still is absolutely beautiful. You have a chrome trim on the trunk lid. You have Maserati that matches that trim. That looks very, very nice. And these taillights are very sharp and cool looking. Of course, you have a very just plain, nice red going throughout the back end here, and 2 more parking sensors so that because you don't have a frickin' backup camera in 2015, you know if you're about to hit something. Now, the back end of this car would just not be complete without these absolutely massive exhaust tips that produce one of the best noises in the automotive industry, especially for a V8. Now, these only come on the sport model, so if you get the base model, you get dual tip exhausts that still look pretty decent, but I think these really complete the back end design of this car. And if you get the MC or the MC Stradale, then you have the dual tip exhaust coming out of the middle back end of this car. That just takes the cake. And by the way, if you do end up getting the convertible version of the GranTurismo, then your trunk space is insanely limited because it is taken up by the soft top. So I mean, you could maybe fit a backpack in here, but there is not a lot of space in the convertible version. Not to mention, if you just heard that, this is also electronic, so another thing that you have to worry about breaking. All right, now let's go ahead and check out this interior. Just before we actually get in and look at the interior, I mean, the view of this from when this thing goes flying past you is absolutely gorgeous. These cream-colored seats with the Maserati logo stitched into the headrest looks absolutely amazing. This is an option if you're gonna get one of these used, which you pretty much have to if you're getting one below 2019, then make sure it has that option because it just looks so absolutely beautiful. The back of this car is loaded up with speakers on all sides, 6 Bose speakers in the back to make sure your backseat passengers are not only insanely comfortable, insanely roomy, get their own climate and cup holders, but they're also absolutely vibing to whatever music you play, which should be classical music if you're gonna drive one of these. All right, so starting with this steering wheel here, a lot of people do complain about the design of this steering wheel, and I will somewhat side with them. It's just not that interesting to me. It would be nice if there was some carbon fiber. There is aftermarket support for steering wheels on this car, but this leather one, it's just very plain. The black doesn't really look all that good. Attached here are huge paddle shifters, and let me tell you, these are some of the most fun things to play with because the downshifts on this car are the most brutal, best sounding downshifts I've heard in my life. This is basically just an expensive musical instrument. So if you like sounds, this is going to be the car for you. Now, the gauge cluster in here is pretty outdated, but I think it is still cool. It's got a very Italian feel to it. Of course, you have two more Maserati logos. Why not? You can see mine has 41,300 miles on it. If you do have any questions, please drop them down in the comments. And the little screen in the center here, let's go ahead and start it up and I'll show you. So in the GranTurismo, there's no push to start. It's an old school key, and there's more old technology features to come, as you'll see. So the first things first, if you're not familiar with GranTurismos, you better know that the check engine light's gonna stay on for the first 15 seconds every single time. It's gonna run a little system check, and assuming everything's gonna go correctly, that check engine light will go away. 3, 2, 1. Sometimes, there we go. Okay, sometimes it'll stay on and scare you. This is of course not actually blinking, it's because of the frame rate of the camera, but really just tells you if you're in park, reverse, neutral drive, if you're in sport or auto, or sorry, sport or non-sport, that'll just go away. You can see that little green thing that pops up there. And then if you actually push this gear lever over and go to manual mode, then it'll say manual instead of auto. I got myself the ZF automatic 6-speed, and yeah, it feels fantastic. Just the least fun transmission, but I'd rather not spend $10,000 a year on my transmission keeping it up to date, so I'm happy with what I got. This thing's gonna have a 7,500 RPM redline, and it has one of the best redline sounds. It has one of the best 2,000 RPM sounds. No matter where you're at in that power range, it's gonna sound phenomenal. This thing has a top speed of around 180-ish miles an hour, so it can't actually go all the way up to 200, but it's cool seeing the 200 on the speedometer there. Now, up here, you're gonna have a little Maserati clock, which this thing is a bit faded on my car due to the sun beating down on it in Arizona. 10,000 degree weather. You're gonna have one of the most outdated infotainment systems ever, and expect your gas mileage to be somewhere around there. Yep, I saw 12.9 when I first loaded up this screen. So now we're at 13.6. We're making a pretty big difference here. And this thing is simply controllable through these knobs. It's not touchscreen. You get the radio, you get a very tedious navigation system. You can see information like this. It's not an infotainment system you're gonna want for 2015, and no backup camera again. So again, if you're able to put up with those things, don't worry about it. It's worth putting up with that for the engine, the sound, the speed, the beautiful art craftsmanship that this car gives you on the exterior and even the interior. So on the dash side, you're gonna see GranTurismo C Sport. If that was a base model, it would just say GranTurismo. And if you get the MC, it would say MC. If you get the MC Stradale, it would say MC Stradale. This interior is really just about the classiness, the fine Italian leather, the design, the Maserati stitching on the headrest. It is not some techie interior with LED strips and all these different options to choose from. It's simple, which is something you gotta learn to appreciate as a car person. Now, 2 cup holders, because this is a convertible, I have my convertible switch right here. I have my parking brake right here. You're gonna have your lock and unlock in a very weird location in this car. So it's actually in your center console here. And of course, you get your climate control. Again, very old school, but it is digital screen. Inside of this little storage center here, you probably heard it, it's a little bit squeaky. You get a pretty deep, good amount of storage space in there. If you're gonna have backseat passengers in here, you simply lift up both of the tabs, this one and the one over here, and then you can push it forward. And this does have powered seats and memory seats as well. Let's go for a drive one more time and talk about the reliability of this car, because that's gonna be something very important if you're thinking about buying one of these. Now, I will save you all of the hassle. I have watched every YouTube video of every owner on this car. I have read every thread online because I wanted to make sure that when I was buying this thing, I didn't get myself into an absolutely terrible situation. And I have very rarely found negative reviews of this car. People praise how reliable this car is. I have seen some owners hit well over 100,000 miles on their GranTurismo and have good things to say about it. If that doesn't tell you something about the reliability, I don't know what will. I will say though, if something does need to be replaced, it's going to be very, very costly, especially if you go through a dealership. Just for example, I called in to see how much an alternator would cost to get replaced, and they said $4,800 at the dealership. If you went to an independent shop, you're probably looking at more like $2,000 to $2,500-ish, but still, that's quite a bit for an alternator. And as for the issues that you could expect to encounter with owning a GranTurismo, some of the common problems that are almost unavoidable is number one, a leaky valve cover gasket. That's pretty much inevitably gonna happen. Even mine has that. You could also run into some axle and suspension issues. That's a little bit less common. And you could also run into some electrical issues. But none of those are gonna be like a big immediate problem. It's just if they get bad enough, it's gonna be an expensive fix. One other thing that I have seen with a GranTurismo owner is a hose coming loose that actually houses the coolant. And he had all of his coolant actually pour out of the car, and that was around a $1,000 fix for a hose. Reason being is because they had to actually drop the engine out in order to fix that problem. And then of course there's gonna be things like oil changes, brake rotors, brake pads. I would just say if you can do that stuff yourself, which is really not hard to do, I would. An oil change at a dealership will run you $600 with this car, and a whole entire brake job can get into the thousands. But if you do it yourself and buy aftermarket parts like aftermarket brake pads, you're gonna end up saving yourself thousands of dollars in the long run. So if you're wondering how much it actually costs to keep this thing on the road, I went ahead and averaged together every single report I could find from an owner who actually owned this car. And that number seems to hover around $3,000 to $5,000, which is extremely good for owning a car that was originally $155,000. Let me know what you guys think about this thing, because so far I have zero regret purchasing this thing. I love every single moment with it. And if you're thinking about getting one of these, just make sure you get it in at least semi-decent condition. If you have to do one or two repairs and they're not major, it's not gonna be a huge deal. And if you're somebody that's pretty savvy with doing maintenance stuff on your own, this is gonna be an even better car for you to own, because I've heard they're pretty simple to work on, but I'll keep you guys posted on what I actually do with the car. Appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.